This is Gary Collins, the creator of the Primal Power Method, and I'm here with Mike Evans of America's Voice Now. Thanks for coming on and discussing some health topics with me. I appreciate it, Mike.
Thank you for having me with you. I appreciate it. I appreciate an opportunity to talk with your listenership as well.
Yeah, I think it's important. Mike's organization is a little different from what I usually deal with in my genre, but I feel it's important that people understand some of the aspects of what Mike does, because I think it directly relates to the health movement. And if you understand it, I think it makes you a better person and more well-rounded. I think that's very important. I'm a little different. I just don't stick to one type of philosophy or dogma. I'm a person who likes to hear a lot of different views from a lot of different people.
Well, it's all interrelated, so that makes good sense. Everything is connected, right?
Exactly, and I think that's what people need to understand. And with that being said, how did you start America's Voice Now? What was kind of the thing that caused you to do it?
Well, I'd been in a professional environment all my life. I worked in high-end telecommunications. I was with Verizon and Nortel Networks and a group of other companies. And at one point in my life, I had moved out of the Eastern Seaboard and been to the Midwest, and I had a company that a couple of companies I had created on my own, and I was doing some independent consulting. And one of the companies I created was a sporting goods store because my son was in the military, and it made sense. And I was diligently working at that while still consulting. And I had an event that occurred in my life where I was, sold a weapon by the ATF in kind of a sting operation to try to get me to work for them. I refused to do that, and of course ended up spending some time in Club Fed, shall we say. And so having that experience, which was so divergent from everything I'd ever done in my life. I mean, I'd never had anything more than a traffic ticket prior to that in my life. And it was such a revelation to me to see what was really going on in the system of justice and in government and in politics. And I'd always been interested in politics, but I'd never really had an opportunity to really understand and see the depth of the depravity of what was going on in our nation. And so, when I was later on, as I had my own business, I worked above a radio station, and I'd been writing some things, but they invited me down and they said, "Hey, you got a great voice for radio." So they asked me if I'd be interested in kind of sitting in for a guest or as a guest host because somebody was on vacation, and I said, "Sure." And they really liked what I did, and they asked me to come back a few more times and do the same thing, and I said, "Sure." And then they asked if I would be interested in kind of co-hosting a show with a fellow who was doing a political show. And I was like, "Oh, absolutely." That's right up my alley. And so I kind of co-hosted this thing with him for a few months. And he, at some point, had some personal reasons to leave. And he said, "Do you want to cancel the show?" And I was like, "Heck no. I want that show, And so I changed it around a little bit and kind of made it my own. And America's Voice was born. I built a website, which is what I do for a living, and I created a site and got social media going on it. And the show became so popular that it migrated from a weekend only 1 hour, a 3 hour on a Saturday show to 5 days a week and a Saturday. And wow. The audience just grew and grew and grew. And, it was apparent that I had a knack for trying to take some complex issues and speaking plainly about them and not mincing a lot of words and a lot of the political correctness around it and all of those types of things. And so I now kind of look at it as I analyze and comment on what's going on in our nation. I'm very blunt. I'm very brash. I don't hide anything. I look at it like my job is to deliver truth and expose the mainstream propaganda that we're all subjected to. So that's pretty much the gamut of it.
And people know, as far as my background, I'm a former federal agent, and I used to be in the military. And when you told me your story, I've been there. I know how the wheels of justice turn firsthand. And I'm not...
Except from the other side.
Yeah, exactly. And it's completely from the other side. And I'm the same as you. I'm very outspoken. But at the same time, I try not to integrate politics into what I do on the primal and health movement because it's a little touchy.
Sure.
But I want people still to understand. They still have to be in the system and understand how it works. Otherwise, you will never change and be able to be self-sufficient on your own if you've got your head in the sand.
But
so you have to be in touch.
By the same token, they are all interrelated. I mean, good health, and a lot of my followers are into the self-reliance, self-responsibility, self-governance movements, and additionally, a lot of them are involved in the health movement. And I look at it and I say, well, that's great, but if you're the kind of person that's into self-reliance and you're a person who works in that arena or you have interest in that, but you're in poor physical health, you're really not achieving the goal. I look at it like all of these things are interrelated. Politics is tied to that because I hear people say to me, well, I'm into prepping or I'm into self-reliance, but I hate that politics stuff. And I'm like, well, then why are you prepping? Because obviously politics is something you've ignored so long that it's now affecting you to the point where you're spending all of your time and your money and your resources and your life trying to figure out how to prepare for something that is an event or a series of events that you should have been cognizant of in the first place, and you wouldn't have to do all this. It's kind of silly. It's almost self-defeating. It's like you're going to solve the symptom, but you're not going to look at curing the real problem of the disease. Yeah,
and that's what I think too. Is I've watched some of these doomsday prepper shows, and they're pretty crazy, and I think that's where people get confused, right?
Right.
They look at that and they lump everyone into this, and the self-reliance people get lumped into there too, and it's like, no. That's a different group. But when you look at those guys on TV, most of them are huge. They're grossly overweight and in horrible shape.
Right.
Carry a
5-gallon bucket of water on the end of two 5-gallon buckets of water on the end of 2 sticks when the power goes out. You're not going to make it a quarter of a mile. So all that preparation you did doesn't really serve you very well.
And I love when they open up their pantries to all the food they've stored, and it's just garbage. And I'm thinking, if the climb to water doesn't kill you, what you have packed away to survive on definitely will.
Right.
And I think that is a big part of why I think me and you got together is why – do you think that is the biggest part that the self-reliance movement misses is the health movement?
I really do. And I think the self-reliance movement, I think what they're really missing is the understanding that they are affected by that which they actually try to alienate themselves from. Those people who are into the self-reliance and self-sufficiency movements, but are ignoring the political aspects of it. Pericles had a great saying, and is just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean that politics doesn't take an interest in you. And the truth of the matter is that we are affected by those things that are happening in our nation, and that is part of the motivation for why people want to be self-reliant. They feel like they want to disassociate themselves or separate. And in the case of preppers, in many cases, it's their belief that at some point in time, our fiscal system or our power grid or whatever it may be is going to come apart. Well, to be honest, if you're going to look at it from that perspective, and that's the belief that you have, why, instead of just preparing for it, why not try to correct it so that those worst nightmares that you have don't actually come to fruition? I mean, isn't that a better solution?
The isolation
and that's where
attitude,
Well, that's where the bridge is missing.
Yeah.
You see, the bridge is that these things are all interconnected and they're all interrelated. And if you're only going to solve the symptom of the disease, then you've really never gotten to the disease itself, which is corruption, which is betrayal, which is the fact that our politicians no longer represent us, but they represent themselves and their quest for power and ego and money and what have you. And so if you correct those things, the risk is much lower that you will have a catastrophic event that will force you to do those things that you're preparing for. I mean, it's to me, it's just common sense.
Yeah, it's you're right. And I mean, right now, healthcare is approaching 20% of GDP. And I mean, that to me is writing on the wall that, well, you might want to focus on your health because it will bankrupt you or it's going to kill you or both. So why wouldn't you start there? And, when I talk in my seminars, I tell people from the moment you wake up, what you put in your mouth is going to affect your entire day and your entire life. That is how it works. So if you want to be, better at, say, your job, raising your family, well, guess what? If you're physically fit and you feel well, all those things come together.
Right.
If you can't remember where your car keys are and you're in your 20s, there's probably a good amount
down
of
the Snickers bar and
yeah. It's because you're eating like crap and your brain has actually no fuel and no way to repair and replace the cells that you're killing every single day.
Well, I'm old enough to remember the old phrase "garbage in, garbage out." Now that was related to computers, and of course, from a telecom background and being a bit of a geek, that makes sense to me. Garbage in, garbage out. You program garbage in, and what's going to come out the other side is garbled nonsense. And it's the same thing with our bodies. If you're going to put garbage into your body, you're not going to have the capability and the wherewithal to feed your mind and to feed your muscles and to feed your every aspect of your body, from your lymph nodes all the way out to your skin. And those are all important aspects of, and it's all interrelated. And if people recognize that interrelation, I think they'd be a lot further ahead in feeling like that they have that it's a holistic approach versus just targeting one specific area.
And I think that's where me and you we're think so much alike, because government works the same way. It's all interrelated. Your body's interrelated. And actually, it's funny that you're a computer programmer, because you understand this, that basically our genetic code is nothing but a very complicated computer program.
Absolutely.
It's code. It's code. Our gene expression, everything works in code. And understanding how one piece affects the other, and doctors always tell you that they know it. We understand genetics. We've got this now. And I'm like, are you dreaming? Each gene has at least 10,000 different ways of expressing itself that we know of. We have 20,000 genes that express themselves that we know of.
Right.
So that's 20,000 times 10,000 that we know of. And these guys are going to tell me that they know how this works.
For a doctor to make a statement like that is like two Neanderthals sitting there talking about interstellar travel. I mean, it's just so, the concept of that is like, you think you know that? Really? You got to be kidding me. I mean, you may grasp the overall concept, but the integrated mechanics of it are like so far outside your scope and reality to grasp, you're dreaming if you think you could actually accomplish it. And to me, that's just arrogance and hubris,
And it is. I think that's one of my biggest problems with working with FDA and U.S. Department of Health and Human Services as an agent, is just the arrogance I saw in the medical and drug community of they just knew better, and they don't.
Well, actually, Gary, I think a lot of that is motivated not necessarily by do they know better, but what is their agenda? It's amazing to me how many people will sacrifice that which they know. In other words, they'll sacrifice their own integrity and their own ethic in order to accomplish the short-term goal of meeting the job requirement or getting a job or getting paid or selling this product. And to me, that is what I consider that, and I call that self-treason, which is the worst form of treason. It's one thing for me to betray someone else. That's treason. But when I betray myself, that's got a whole different level of universal condemnation that goes along with it, I mean, and I'm talking now about, in the karmic sense, right? I mean,
and that's
you just can't do that and expect that you're going to have any level of self-esteem, self-respect. You once you start sacrificing and selling yourself off like that, once you prostituted your beliefs and your ideas and your ethics, then there's nothing left there's nothing that's sacred anymore.
Yeah, and I definitely saw that firsthand, not only within the medical and drug communities, but I also saw it within government. I saw how the government kind of lost its way, and I know that's a little outside the realm of what I teach in health, but I got into it with a guy. He was a doctor on one of these groups I belong to on Facebook, health groups, and he was talking about statins and how, he was talking two sides out of his mouth. It was really weird. He was kind of against them, but for them at the same time. And I went, you do realize statins are the number one selling drug in the world. And there's a good reason for it. It's the most counterfeited drug in the world, because I used to investigate it. And, it's all about money. And he goes, oh, you can't make a generalization like that. How would you know? And I go, I used to investigate it. Trust me. It's about money. I kind of have a little experience in this.
I have a problem with the people who have that whole kind of philosophy, which is that they don't really have a true foundational knowledge and understanding for for what has formulated their opinion. I strongly advocate and I encourage my listeners to use critical thinking, which is something that America has not been taught in our schooling and in our daily lives for a very, very long time. And it is something that most of us don't even recognize that we don't do right or don't do at all. And the critical thinking process says that you have to have an open mind to not only that which you have already established as your own personal beliefs and biases, but you have to be willing to listen to the other side, and you have to be willing to look into those areas that stand against what you believe so that you can at least you may confirm what you believe, but you may also not confirm what you believe and become more well-rounded in your overall belief system. And regardless of what this is, and this doesn't matter whether you're talking about politics or religion or, the philosophy or anything else, it's all the same. And people don't do that. And it's a crime, actually, because without that capability, you get somebody who sits there and tries to argue both sides of the same argument to themselves and you. And you're like, your entire presentation is so tangled, it's like a pot of spaghetti. I can't possibly straighten this back out and put it back into the box,
Well, yeah. And the guy was in the Gary Taubes group. And it was bizarre to me because Gary Taubes talks about the dangers of statins and all this. And he goes, I tell all my clients to read his book. And then he's going, well, I don't see how you can generalize all statins is bad and that doctors and drug companies just do it for money. And I'm all, huh? I'm confused.
Yeah.
And he got ripped on. It wasn't just me. Everyone else piled on him too. He got beat up pretty good.
Well, the truth is people expose themselves when they parrot someone else's opinion, which they've kind of purchased or adopted, right? And so they find someone with whom they agree with that's perhaps more articulate or explains it a little bit better or, phrases it in a way that they appreciate. And rather than challenge their own idea and confirm that is what they actually believe, they just put it in their pocket like, oh, he agrees with me, and that's my new opinion. And they start carrying it around, and like a little parrot on their shoulder, it just chips away, and they utilize that. And I tell my audience all the time, don't be a parrot. Formulate your own opinion, because then when you do get into an intellectual discussion with someone, you can actually be, one, intellectually honest, but more importantly, you can reach down into that. I use this analogy of a Christmas ball. And the most of the people that I argue with, especially related to politics, because it's so divisive and so alienating and quite frankly so emotional, it's like a Christmas ball. And there's paint on the outside of this Christmas ball. But if you were to sit there and take a knife and scrape away that layer of paint, it's hollow and empty inside. Whereas when you've done your due diligence, when you've done your homework, when you truly understand your subject, when you're a subject matter expert, and you don't have to be, nobody's all knowledgeable, but nobody's omniscient about it. But when you have a good foundation and you've read your opposing viewpoint and yours, then your opinion is more like a shot put. It's solid all the way through. And to me, that enables you to actually have an intelligent conversation. And what happens is they always expose themselves, because the minute that you scrape away that paint on the surface of their Christmas ornament, immediately they descend down into the emotional or the irrational, and they expose themselves every single time that way.
Yeah, and I think that ties directly into what I talk about during my seminars too, and in my writings, is using common sense when you're trying to figure out your diet and health and eating. I'm all, okay, think about it this way. This is why I use Primal Man as my mascot to say. I go, okay, if you're out in the forest and you have to live on your own, you have to live off the land, what would you have access to? What foods would be around you? Would you have a lot of processed carbohydrates and sugar? Unlimited amounts? I'm all, no.
Right.
So why are you doing that to yourself now, even though the food companies and, the agriculture business and the food pyramid now, My Plate, all tells you to eat anywhere from, I think it's somewhere like 11 to 20 servings of carbohydrates a day, which is physically, literally impossible. You could do it, but you'll look just like everyone looks like today, which is huge.
Right. Or you'll have diabetes.
Yeah. And I go, you're not getting healthier. As a nation, we're getting sicker. So what's being touted as healthy is not working. So if you used common sense and deductive thinking, you would come to the same conclusion that I and others are coming to who are trying to teach this, that it doesn't work. It's more of an ancestral kind of primal way of thinking about things. Okay, I would have access to some roots, some plants, some nuts, seeds. Mainly I would have access to animals.
Right.
You know, animals have this thing called saturated fat. We store our fat as saturated fat. So why would it kill us? I'm a little confused on that one. But yet sugar, which I have no access to in nature hardly, it would be in fruit, which is very hard to find, is good for me as long as it's, you know, in natural now. Now they've gone to the all natural, or it's in the form of high fructose corn syrup because it has no insulin response, even though it causes insulin resistance. And, you know, you just think it through. Think through the facts. And I like when I see the light bulb go off in people's heads and they kind of go, I get it now.
Right.
And I go, that's right. Just think for yourself, put yourself in that position, and that's how it should work as far as health. And that's what I write about. That's why my books are considered so simple. I go, you don't need 300 and 400 pages of biochemistry and talking
Right.
about all the metabolic pathways in your body that we understand to be healthy.
Sure.
You just need the roadmap. That's
Well,
all you need.
When you look back and you know, you look at a lot of people talk very negatively about meat and meat products. And, you know, I hear the vegans, you know, talk about, well, you know, there's all this saturated fat in it. But I got to tell you something. I don't know that it's necessarily the saturated fat. Now, this is just my way of thinking, and I'm certainly no nutritional expert. But when I look at it and I look back at what things were like 50, 60 years ago, people ate all the same meat that we eat today. One, it didn't have all of the hormones and the antibiotics incorporated into it. But more importantly, they also didn't double down with all of the sugar and the laden garbage and the chemicals that we're ingesting now. And when you look back at pictures of people in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, they weren't fat. They were thin, and they were now. Of course, they worked physically in a different way than we do as well. I mean, it's hard to you know, be thin and trim when you sit behind a desk all day. But by the same token, you know, they got up and they had eggs and bacon every morning on a farm. But then they worked all through the day and they worked it off. And those eggs and bacon weren't, you know, laden with all of these other chemicals. And then on top of that, you know, you're eating cereal that's laden with sugars and carbohydrates and all of this garbage. And then wondering why, you know, you're packing on poundage like a bear just before winter, you know?
Yeah.
You know? And unlike bears, we don't sleep it off, you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is it is a little more complicated than that. And I talked to him about, okay, you know, once you get the basic concepts, now you've got to take the next step of understanding free range meat, understanding the chemicals that are put in our mass processed food today, as far as the CAFO, you know, confined animal feeding operations, and what they're putting into those animals.
Right.
But I notice if you give it to them all at once, it's too much. They're like, whoa, wait.
Yeah.
Okay, you're telling me I'm unhealthy because I'm eating the wrong foods. Then when I eat the right foods, those are wrong too. Now I need to take an extra step. Well, you know what? You've been dumping garbage in your body for decades. If you spend the next 6 months just figuring out what food to put for our groups, how to, you know, piece together a normal meal, and then you take the step to going organic, free range, you're not going to die in that time period. You're going to be fine.
Right.
You know, so I tell them, let's, you know, if you can do it, I do. I have clients that go all ends of the spectrum. Some dive in head first and they go out and they buy all their organic meats, all their organic fruit. They go to the farmers markets. They figure it all out. And then there's other people that it's just overwhelming. You could see their eyes and they're just glazed over and they go, oh my God, I can't do all this at once. And I go, you don't need to. There's no rules. You don't have to do that. But, you know, just understand the process and start thinking for yourself. And once you start figuring out the food groups, then you'll go, okay, now I need to take this a step further. Because now I'm eating the proper meats, but, you know, the fat's laden with antibiotics and growth hormone and everything else, and all the pesticides and chemicals these cows are eating get stored in their fat.
Right.
And that's why I tell everyone, eat the fat unless you're eating a CAFO animal. Then you need to cut the fat off because that's where they're going to store most of the toxins.
Sure.
And that's the thing of understanding. Yeah.
All of this stuff goes back to the critical thinking concept, right? Where you really need to. You know, part of the problem that we have, I think, in this country, and it's a generalization, I grant you, but part of the problem that we have is that, you know, we've been indoctrinated with this concept that don't think for yourself. We'll tell you what you should think. It's the old adage of, when I want your opinion, I'll tell you what it is, and then you can give it back to me, And, it's kind of like we have been indoctrinated with this idea that don't think for yourself. Just follow what your doctor says or follow. And then, of course, we're bombarded all day long by propaganda that is fed to us across the television and the radio and the media and, newspapers and articles we read. And, go through Reader's Digest these days. I remember when I was a kid reading Reader's Digest, they had lots of stories and articles and they had advertising. But today, the ads are, a 4-page ad for some drug. And when you look at the contradictions and you look at the stuff that is a side effect of that, it's actually worse than the disease the risk of what you're, ingesting into your body is greater than the actual disease or thing you're trying to fight with it. And I think to myself, that has... It's gone, everything is upside down. It's like gravity has left the earth. We don't use common sense anymore. We don't use our own thinking process to say, well, maybe there's an unintended consequence to this. And you just blindly accept that, well, if I take an antidepressant, I'm going to feel better by tomorrow. And the truth is, we've got a nation in apathy because 40% of America is sitting there taking the blue pill. It's insane.
Yeah. That's the great blue pill or the red pill. Yeah. And what do you think is the fix to it, though? What do you think for the people, especially your followers, who I'm sure you preach to on health, but obviously you're more of a political show. What do you think the fix is for them trying to prepare themselves and trying to be self-reliant in the step of health? What is the fix for them?
Well, the first step is that no matter what you're talking about, whether you're talking about health, whether you're talking about your political involvement, your religious involvement, whatever it is, whatever that topic is, the first step that everyone should do is to learn and understand how your own thought process works. Because if you don't understand that, it's like me saying, it's like Gary saying, it doesn't really matter how your body processes food, just do what I tell you and you'll get well. Well, that's not going to work. You have to understand the integral process of how your body processes that carbohydrate or that fat or that vitamin so that you understand what it does. Because without that knowledge, it's the Christmas ornament that's just got a coat of paint on it, but it's hollow inside. And so the same thing applies across the board, no matter what that topic is. First, understand what motivates you and how your mind works, or how your body works in your case, and then understand. And you'll look at it. You'll look at everything you touch from then on. Everything that makes contact with you will be viewed in a different perspective. And it's the same thing when you are looking at any topic. Use critical thinking. And if you don't know what that means, there's plenty of ways out there that you can learn about how to be a critical thinker and what the process or the steps are so that you question everything and you think through what are the consequences to this action or this idea or this process. And then once you've grasped that, then you're in a much better position to make decisions that are positive for you and have an effect that's lasting. In other words, it's not just quickly transient. And the same thing goes for health. If you're just going to sit there and say, well, I'm just going to fast once a week and that'll solve my problem, that's a transient solution. And that's why I think people who go on diets don't last on them because, they get bored with it or they lose focus on it or it doesn't work fast enough or whatever the case may be. We're used to instant results, instant gratification, and it's not a healthy way to be in mind or body or spirit.
Yep. And that's what I like about what you do so much is that's what I teach. I mean, that's what the Primal Power Method is all about. It's about mind, body, soul. I tell people that. I integrate pieces of paleo, but paleo is technically just a diet, even though these young people who are in the paleo movement now are trying to redefine paleo, and it aggravates me because it actually confuses a lot of people trying to figure out what paleo is. That's a topic for a whole nother time. But yeah, I agree with you. The fix is, I tell them, like, that's why I put in my book, fasting and intermittent fasting is at the very, very end of my book. Because I tell them, if you have not mastered everything prior to this, this is not going to work at all.
Right.
And I explain that, and I think that's it. I try and teach things in steps, and and understanding the whole. And that still means being cognizant of the government, of what the government's doing, what the medical community's doing, what the farmers and agriculture business are doing. You have to understand that all, or otherwise you're never going to get it. You at least have to pay attention. And that goes back into the self-reliance and the whole philosophy of still being involved and not detaching yourself from society.
There's a lesson I learned when I had my own legal experiences, and that was that no one, and I do mean no one, is an advocate for you like you are. And it doesn't matter what that topic is. It only means that no one is going to be as interested in your success or in your growth or in your ability to live your life in the most positive way than you. No one can be an advocate for you like you can be. And irrespective of what area of your life that takes, it is imperative that you recognize that and that you stop listening to when we talk about healthcare as an example, you've got, these companies that are out there pumping you full of everything can be solved with a pill. Well, some things can't be solved with a pill, and some things shouldn't be solved with a pill, especially if that pill just becomes, an escape essentially for resolving the real root of the problem. And the same thing in politics. You're not going to be able to solve this by just putting another guy back into office who's going to do the same thing that the last guy did, Or I hear people say to me all the time, well, all those people up in Congress are awful, but my representative. And it's like, no, your representative is no different than the rest of them. They've all sold out, And that's why I'm a firm believer. I tell my listening audience all the time, don't be passive and allow this to affect you. Take an active role. And I don't care whether that's running for the school board or running for city council or running for a state representative or even a federal representative. But be involved and a participant. But you got to go into it with the right spirit. You have to go back and say to 5 people that I'm going to run for this office, but I know that politics has a corrupting influence on everyone that touches it. So I'm expecting you to hold me accountable. And I'm going to sign an agreement with you that says if I do not hold true to the values which I profess to hold true to today, 3 years from now or 4 years from now, then here is my pre-signed resignation, and all you've got to do is date it.
Wow. Yeah, that is. Yeah, and that's interesting how that interconnects again to what I teach, and I call it projected failure is what I tell people, because I go, why are you here? Why do you want to change your life? Why do you want to change your health? And I go, are you doing it for your family? Are you doing it for your kids, your husband? And a bunch of hands come up, and I go, I realize you already failed, right? And they go, what? I don't understand. I go, that's the answer that you tell yourself that you want to hear. If you don't do this for yourself first, you're missing the whole point. You have to be involved with yourself.
Right.
You need to take responsibility. You need to figure it out on your own, and then you can worry about your family.
Right.
Because and they just look at me puzzled, like I'm talking insanity, and I'm all, trust me on this. I've done this for a while. If you do this for yourself, your ability to be successful is increased tenfold. If you do it for someone else, well, you already got a built-in excuse. Well, I didn't make it. I failed them. When you fail someone else, it's not as big of a deal as when you fail yourself.
Right. And that goes back to my point before of the worst kind of treason is self-treason. That's the guy who has been clean for a year and then decides to go back out and, because he's under a lot of pressure, crack a bottle and take a drink. Or, somebody who goes and reinserts that needle into their arm, or somebody who engages in self-destructive behavior. And if you've gone and you've gotten yourself cleaned up because your wife threatened to leave you or your parents threatened to kick you out or whatever the case may be, you really aren't experiencing a true change of attitude. You're just hiding. And it's the same thing with every aspect of our lives. But, we're constantly taught to not focus in on who we are inside and what motivates us. We're always taught to respond to external influences and never worry about what really is the core beliefs and ideas and opinions that we have about ourselves and those things that surround us, that affect us. And I truly believe that, Americans as a general group and human beings as the larger picture, all of us are missing one critical aspect, and that is that instead of being introspective, we are extrospective. In other words, we're more worried about the impression that somebody else has about us than what we think about ourselves. And that can never be a positive thing, because now you're constantly changing who you are or what you think or what your opinion is, or based on you can see this when you see a group of people who, and I see it all the time in the political realm, somebody who professes one thing to me, and then we'll be sitting around with some people that we know don't agree with us, and they'll modify their position to please the people they're talking to. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, I would rather be tossed out of here in my ear and told to never come back than I would to betray myself and my own beliefs so that I can get somebody else's approval. I don't need their approval that badly.
Yeah. And I think that opens up a whole nother concept of how we could talk about the newest generation and how they've been taught that, everyone gets a trophy and everyone's got to be happy, and in the sense of you got to sacrifice your happiness to make sure someone else is happy instead of being happy first, and then your happiness actually will make them happy.
Right.
I think we just have
endless sacrificing yourself on the altar of altruism, right? How absurd a concept is that, Make everybody else happy, and then you'll in turn eventually, under trickle down economic theory, you'll get happy too. It's like, what?
Well, and
who taught you that? And how do you...
everyone becomes miserable instead. Right. The polar opposite happens, and that's a topic for another time. But
that's exposed in socialism, right? Socialism works great until you run out of everybody else's money.
Yeah.
So, and then what?
But I think we've hit a lot of topics, and I do think a lot of people find this very interesting. And I think we went into a different area than most of the mainstream, paleo and primal people get into, and I think they'll really enjoy it. And I think your listeners will enjoy it too.
Sure. Well, I'm pretty hardcore political, but your listeners are certainly welcome to visit with me. I'll give you I'll kind of reiterate the places where they can find me. The name of the show is America's Voice Now, and we have a website which is AmericasVoiceNow.org. Or .com. That'll both go to the same place. We have a Facebook page which we encourage people to visit, and that is facebook.com/America's Voice Now. Even if you're not a Facebook user, you can still go there because it's a public page, so that you can't maybe comment, but you can still read all the stuff there. And then, of course, we have a YouTube channel because I stream the show live every day in video and audio. And so they can either get a podcast there or download the video or just watch it. And that's youtube.com/America's Voice Now. Basically, if you remember the phrase America's Voice Now, you'll find it. And, I generally focus in on the political aspect because, to be honest with you, that's such a broad area. And I think it's the one area that a lot of people who are into the self-reliance or protection mode are failing in. In other words, that's the one area of their lives that they're really not concentrating on what's going on. Even the preppers are sitting there prepping, but they don't know, they don't think, well, wait a minute, maybe if I just fix this, I wouldn't need to be a prepper.
Yeah.
And so, if you're prepping for disaster, isn't it better to avoid the disaster than to deal with the consequences of it when it happens? So, if I'm too political for your listeners, I apologize. That's really what I do. I love the idea of making sure, though, that you're looking at everything from a holistic perspective. But my listeners are coming to me for that aspect of their lives, that they look at it and say, this is an area where I can find the core critical information I need on that area. And so, I hope that we can educate some folks. And our goal is to educate and inform and to motivate them and then to take action on that motivation.
Well, and that's what I'm all about, too. And that's why I think having someone like you as a guest, and I'll be transcribing this for the blog as well, and I'll have the audio recording. I'll have all your links on there as well.
Great.
And that's what I want my followers to be. I want them to be more free thinkers. I want them to be, like you said, a more holistic thinker, because that's what the Primal Power Method and what I teach is all about. You have to look at everyone else's views in order to basically come to your own views. You have to understand them all, at least listen to them, and not just be so one-dimensional in life.
The best part about that is, even if you retain the original opinion you had, you have a great grasp on what their thinking is, so you know exactly how to position the argument that you're going to make to bring them around to your way of thinking.
Yep, exactly.
So,
so it's not just one-sided. You can discuss reasonably and intelligently of their views as well.
Sure.
Because you understand them. If you don't understand their views, you're no better than them.
Right.
I mean, you have to be well-rounded, and that's where it all falls into health.
You never see a mechanic who's only got one wrench in his bag. And the same thing for a carpenter. He doesn't have just a hammer. He has a hammer, but he also has a pair of pliers, and he also has a socket set, and he's got, all the tools for whatever that particular job may be. So, it's important that we make sure that we've got the skill set to not only have those tools, but to use them properly for whatever the given situation may be.
Exactly. Well, I really appreciate it, Mike, and I'll definitely have you on again, and we can get into some different topics because I know we got a lot to talk about. So,
yep. Well, thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate your audience joining with us today. I'm always gratified to have an opportunity to kind of bring some other folks to awareness, and that's a good thing.
Great. Well, take care, Mike.
Thank you so much.